President Donald Trump has returned to the global stage, making his more than 1 hour appearance at the World Economic Forum in Davos. From the war in Ukraine to renewed interest in Greenland and politics in Venezuela, President Trump's remarks have stirred controversy and drawn global attention.
Donald Trump's appearance at the World Economic Forum in Davos was anything but quiet. The U.S. president reignited his long-standing interest in acquiring Greenland, describing it as a strategic asset critical to U.S. and global security.
The USA is the economic engine on the planet, and when America booms, the entire world booms. It's been the history. When it goes bad, it goes bad. You all follow us down, and you follow us up, and we're at a point that I don't believe we've ever been. I never thought we could do it this quickly.
President Trump ruled out the use of force, but argued that only the United States could adequately protect the vast ice-covered landmass.
Now what I'm asking for is a piece of ice, cold and poorly located. I have tremendous respect for both the people of Greenland and the people of Denmark, tremendous respect. But every NATO ally has an obligation to be able to defend their own territory. And the fact is, no nation or group of nations is in any position to be able to secure Greenland other than the United States. We're a great power.
President Trump accused NATO partners of failing to pull their weight.
It's a very small ask compared to what we have given them for many, many decades. But the problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%.
Let's bring in global affairs analyst Stephen Hayes and Uriah Fratelli. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the news this hour. Trump's speech today at Davos was combative and focused heavily on Greenland, on trade and Europe, and there are conversations as to whether this is the kind of message the world expects at a forum meant for global cooperation. Mr. Hayes, let's begin with the U.S. president talking about buying Greenland. In fact, in the last hour, he just posted that there's now the framework of a future deal on Greenland that has been reached. And that was after a meeting with NATO chief Mark Rutte at the World Economic Forum. Do you think this will potentially change the way countries deal with one another?
Well, I think Mr. President Trump has already changed the way countries deal with one another, for better or worse. It's a whole new world. In fact, I think what really needs to be pointed out is the Prime Minister of Canada, Carney's speech, which I think was one of the greatest speeches ever made at Davos, and certainly he accented that the world has changed very dramatically and there's new alliances developing. So I think that needs to get a lot of attention. But as far as your question, President Trump changing, I think the nature of the president, his personality, his background, automatically changes the way people deal with one another. There's probably no one that I can think of that he didn't insult in his speech today, one way or another, even though he claimed he doesn't like to insult anyone. It's his modus operandi for negotiations. So I think we're in for a long-term series of adjustments in how we deal with one another. I hope it improves, but I'm not optimistic at this particular moment. Whether Greenland really is an agreement for Greenland, I have my doubts at the moment, but I think the president had to quickly backtrack when Europe held its ground about suspending trade agreements.
Serious adjustment in how we deal with one another, Mr. Fratelli. The world is changing very fast before our very eyes. Let me come to you right now. You heard the U.S. president also criticizing NATO. He did say the U.S. gives so much and gets so little. How do you think comments like these affect NATO's unity and Europe's security, especially with ongoing tensions in Ukraine?
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I think what Trump did was basically turn NATO into a bad business deal. He talks like the alliance is some kind of service to the US, provided out of generosity, and everyone else is just taking advantage of. And that's not how NATO really works. NATO exists to amplify American power, not to drain it. And the clearest proof is something he simply erases. The only time Article 5 was ever triggered was after 9/11 for the United States. So allies didn't respond with speeches or symbolic gestures. They shared intelligence. They protected US facilities. They sent troops. They went to war. When Trump says America got nothing, he's not just wrong on the facts, he's wiping out the single moment when the alliance existed exactly for Washington. What I've been saying in my comments for the Brazilian media is that this is where the moral shock comes in, because when we look at Denmark, even though it's a small country, when Article 5 was activated, Danish soldiers went to Afghanistan. They fought, they died, and proportionally, Denmark lost more soldiers than US, which means that the sacrifice was made for the alliance. So in the end, the message that Trump sends is that he's willing to replace cooperation with coercion and public shaming. And alliances, they don't survive on fear or on humiliation. So we might as well say that the damage has already been made.
They say there's a fragile thread holding these very important countries together at this time, especially when you read the mood of that speech from the U.S. president. Mr. Hayes, he also the U.S. president keeps using tariffs to push his agenda and link them to other issues like Greenland. Do you think using trade like this actually works in global diplomacy, or could it backfire for the U.S. and its partners?
I think that's going to change in part because of Mark Carney's address. I think that his particular point that the only reason this type of behavior, he didn't ever refer directly to the U.S. or President Trump, but it was very clear, is that because citizens and nations tolerate it. And I think he's probably one of the few people who's ever gotten a standing ovation at Davos. And I think I think people will coalesce around Carney now in terms of a leader, particularly for what's called the mid-level countries in terms of size. I think that's got to change. I think there's beginning to grow a growing unease in this country with what's happening, both internally and externally. And there's no public, well, it's not true, but there's 70% of the public is against acquiring or pushing Greenland in any way.
I'm wondering, is there a referendum? How did he come up with that figure?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. How did he come up with?
You mentioned that 70% of the people do not support his move on Greenland.
Well, that's true. Those are polling numbers that are pretty widely public, almost by any political persuasion. So 70% of the people don't approve of what's happening vis-a-vis in the United States towards Greenland. What disturbs me is that 30% do. I think this is very, very disturbing. But there is not strong public support for moves towards Greenland. In fact, no one was really aware of thinking about this until the president began pushing this for some time.
Mr. Fratelli, the big question is, how is the Global South weighing on this and reading the room? You know, the U.S. president was very critical of Europe's energy policies and the Green New scam, while he highlighted U.S. energy strength. And there are conversations as to what this means for cooperation in energy and climate between the U.S. and Europe, and even competition with China. What role can the Global South play in all of this?
I don't think either the Global South or anyone else can play any role when it comes to Donald Trump's decision. I can speak on behalf of myself, and we can ask ourselves a question. Do we really think that if Donald Trump's main goal had actually been simply to reach an agreement with NATO, like he now claims, he would have needed to go this far, despite all the leverage he already has over NATO? Would he have really needed to threaten like this, and in the process damage the image of the United States as a reliable partner inside NATO and the European Union? Honestly, I don't think so. Any kind of agreement could have been achieved at a much lower political and reputational cost. What Trump is trying to do now is sell this whole episode as a win, as if the damage itself proves how good a negotiator he is. So when we look at what actually happened, there are two possibilities. The first one, I think it's pretty straightforward, that NATO Secretary General simply doesn't have the authority or the willingness to make any deal that would violate Denmark's sovereignty over Greenland. And when Europe pushed back against Donald Trump's threats, talking about suspending last year's EU-US agreement and even openly raising the possibility of using the EU's anti-coercion instrument, Trump may have realized something very important, that direct threats might not work on Europe anymore. Europe is clearly signaling that it's done playing nice. And the second possibility, without downplaying Donald Trump's long-standing obsession with NATO, with Greenland, is that 1 year into his new administration, he had nothing concrete to show, no meaningful economic achievements, no major positive results. What he does have is more authoritarianism, militarization of cities, and a growing international isolation for the United States. Faced with that, Trump shifts attention away from domestic problems and toward an external show of bravado. And in this case, the bravado was Greenland. So no matter which explanation is right, the tactic, I think it's obvious. It's the same he uses all the time, over and over. He creates chaos, he manufactures a crisis, pushes towards some kind of a deal, even if it's not a deal or a great deal or a particularly useful one, and then sells it as if the deal of the century, with himself as the only person who could have pulled it off. So we've seen this before with different situations, and we're seeing it again and again. It's exactly what happened with the mineral deals with Ukraine, which in reality didn't achieve much of anything.
One thing is certain, he has a completely different opinion about himself, especially thinking he should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize, and the inflation has really gone down with employment making some significant gain on his presidency. Gentlemen, we've completely run out of time. Mr. Hayes, in 30 seconds, if you can, are you optimistic that things will not escalate in the coming years? Do you think that the world is going to adjust to the personality of Donald Trump?
I think the world has adjusted to the personality of Donald Trump, and I think they're tired of it. And I think that there's going to be some serious pushbacks from now on. I would agree with my counterpart. Europe's tired of it. Canada's clearly tired of it. These were our best friends. So I think there's got to be some changes.
Stephen Hayes, Uriah Fonselli, gentlemen, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
to meet you. Yeah, good to see you.